The Appalachian Trail stretches over 2,000 miles of rugged wilderness, winding through dense forests, steep ridges, and misty valleys. It's a place of breathtaking beauty, but also one of eerie isolation. Hikers often speak of the overwhelming silence, broken only by the rustling of leaves, the distant calls of unseen animals, and sometimes sounds that defy explanation. There's one story, whispered among seasoned hikers, that still sends chills down spines. It happened to a man named Daniel Carter, a solo hiker who set off on a 2-week journey through the most remote sections of the trail in North Carolina. An experienced outdoorsman, Daniel wasn't easily shaken, but something about this trip unsettled him from the start. Maybe it was the way the trees seemed too still, the way shadows stretched unnaturally long as dusk fell. Or maybe it was how, after his second night, he began to feel like he was being watched. At first, it was just an uneasy sensation, the kind you get when you're alone in the woods. But then, he started noticing small things, subtle but unmistakable. Twigs snapping just out of sight, low whispers carried on the wind. One night, as he sat by his campfire, he swore he saw a figure standing at the edge of the trees, just beyond the fire's glow. A tall, thin shape that disappeared the moment he turned his head. Daniel tried to shake it off. He told himself it was nothing, maybe a trick of the firelight. But as he lay in his tent that night, he heard something breathing. Not the deep, rhythmic huff of a bear, nor the quick, darting sounds of a raccoon or fox. This was slow, deliberate, just outside the thin fabric of his shelter. He held his breath, his heart hammering against his ribs. The breathing went on for what felt like hours before finally fading away. The next morning, he found footprints around his campsite. Human footprints, barefoot. The impressions were deep, as if whoever, or whatever, had been standing there had just been watching. Daniel picked up his pace that day, pushing himself hard to put distance between him and whatever had been lurking near his tent. The eerie feeling never left him. That night, he camped near a small, cold stream, setting up his tent with his back against a large boulder for some sense of security. He didn't light a fire, hoping to stay unnoticed. But that didn't matter. Just past midnight, he woke up to the sound of something tapping against his tent. A single, deliberate tap, then another, and another. It wasn't the random patter of rain or the occasional dropping of acorns. It was precise, intentional. He didn't move, he barely breathed. Then from the darkness outside, a voice whispered, a low, hoarse voice that was neither male nor female. "I see you." Daniel exploded out of his tent, flashlight in one hand, knife in the other. His beam cut through the dark, slicing over the trees, the rocks, the stream. Nothing. But as he swung the light back toward his tent, he saw them. Bare footprints leading away from his campsite, vanishing into the trees. The same footprints from before. He didn't sleep that night. At first light, he packed his gear and hiked faster than he ever had in his life, barely stopping to eat or rest. But the feeling never left him. He was being followed. The woods pressed in around him, the silence heavier than ever. He pushed forward until, just as dusk was falling, he saw it. Salvation. A small road cutting through the trees, a ranger station just visible beyond. He sprinted the last 100 yards, burst into the station, breathless and wild-eyed. The ranger on duty took one look at him and frowned. "You all right?" Daniel nodded, but then as he glanced at the window, he froze. Beyond the glass, at the tree line, a figure stood, tall, thin, barefoot, its face obscured by the dark. By the time the ranger turned to look, it was gone.
Story number 2.
The Appalachian Trail is known for its beauty and peace, but it harbors dark secrets too. Secrets that hikers often leave the trail with, never to speak of again. One of the most chilling tales comes from a hiker named Sarah Green, a young woman who decided to take the Appalachian Trail on her own in the late fall, determined to prove her survival skills. She was an experienced hiker and wanted the solitude of the wilderness, but the wilderness had something else in mind. Sarah set out from the southern end of the trail in Georgia, aiming to reach Maine. Everything was perfect at first. The crisp air, the crunch of fallen leaves beneath her boots, the hum of the forest. She camped in the evenings, prepared her meals, and felt a sense of calm that only the deep woods could provide. But as she moved deeper into the trail, strange things began to happen. The first night, after setting up camp near a secluded stream, she heard footsteps outside her tent. Not the shuffle of animals, but the deliberate, slow steps of a person. She held her breath, listening as the footsteps circled around her tent. She felt a cold shiver crawl up her spine, but when she looked out the window of her tent, no one was there. She assumed it was just another hiker, maybe a lost soul wandering in the wilderness. But when she woke up in the morning, she found something that made her blood run cold. Footprints. Barefoot footprints. They were too large to be hers, and the trail of prints started and stopped in the same spot, as if the person had been standing just outside her tent for hours, watching. She didn't stick around long enough to investigate. Her instinct screamed at her to leave. She packed up quickly, trekking deeper into the woods. As the days wore on, Sarah began to hear whispers, soft, indistinguishable voices carried by the wind. She couldn't tell if they were real or if her mind was starting to crack under the isolation. But one evening, she noticed something strange. She wasn't alone. At a small clearing, she saw a figure in the distance. It was far enough that it could have been a trick of the trees, but Sarah felt a strange compulsion to walk toward it. As she approached, she saw a man standing there. He was tall, gaunt, his clothes tattered and weathered. His face was pale, his eyes dark and sunken. He didn't move when she got closer, didn't even acknowledge her presence. It was like he was frozen in place, staring at nothing. Sarah, feeling a sense of deep unease, took a step back, and that's when she heard it. "I can see you." The voice was low and raspy, like something ancient and decayed. Sarah froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She backed away slowly, not taking her eyes off him, until she was sure she was out of his reach. But when she turned to leave, she realized something terrifying. The man was no longer standing still. He was walking, following her. She sprinted, adrenaline pumping, barely able to breathe as she crashed through the woods, her footsteps drowning out the ones behind her. The forest felt like it was closing in, the trees too thick, the shadows too dark. She ran for hours, feeling like she was being hunted, until she stumbled upon an old shelter. There, she collapsed in exhaustion, listening for any sound of pursuit. For hours, she didn't hear a thing. The man, if he had even been real, was gone, but the whispers never stopped. They followed her, whispering from the wind, from the trees, from the ground beneath her feet. Sarah didn't finish the trail. She left the Appalachian Trail the next day, but the whispers stayed with her. They followed her back to civilization, wherever she went. No one ever saw the man again. Some hikers say he's still out there, watching the trail for those brave or foolish enough to wander too far into his domain. And there are others too, whose stories are never heard. The hikers who vanish without a trace, the ones who leave behind nothing but their packs and broken tents, the ones who find the trail not as a path to peace, but as a road to a place where time and reality twist and the shadows of the woods come alive. They say if you listen close enough, you might hear them whispering from the trees, forever lost to the trail's dark embrace.
Story number 3.
The Appalachian Trail has long been a place where legends are born, and not all of them are whispered around campfires. One story that has haunted the woods for years is the tale of a man named Jack Wilder, who disappeared while hiking the trail in the 1980s. His disappearance is one of the most chilling mysteries of the Appalachian Trail, and what's even more unsettling is the strange circumstances surrounding his last moments. Jack was an avid hiker, known for his love of solitary adventures. In the summer of 1985, he set out to hike a section of the trail that ran through Tennessee and Virginia. Jack had hiked these parts before, and his friends said he was well prepared for whatever the wilderness could throw at him. But when he reached a remote stretch of the trail known as the Devil's Hollow, something happened that no one could explain. The last time anyone spoke to Jack was when he checked in at a small ranger station near the entrance to the hollow. He mentioned that he was planning to camp near a waterfall he loved, a place known for its peaceful solitude. But after that, his trail log entries stopped. Days passed without any sign of him. A search party was sent out, but the search came up empty. His backpack, tent, and supplies were found neatly packed at the base of the waterfall, but Jack was nowhere to be seen. What made this story so terrifying, though, were the reports from other hikers. 2 days before Jack disappeared, a couple had been hiking through the same area. They described hearing strange noises, low growls, almost like the sound of an animal, but it didn't sound right. They reported feeling as though they were being watched, a sensation so intense that they cut their hike short and left the trail early. They also mentioned seeing a figure, a man standing motionless between the trees just off the trail. But when they approached the spot, no one was there. After Jack's disappearance, others began to report similar experiences. One hiker spoke of hearing faint whispers while camping near the Devil's Hollow, but when he checked, no one was there. Another reported seeing shadows moving between the trees, just out of the corner of his eye. But whenever he looked directly, they vanished. Some hikers claimed to have found strange symbols carved into trees and rocks in the area, symbols that didn't resemble anything local or natural. Then, 6 months later, a lone hiker named Travis Collins was found in the very same area, shaken and disoriented, claiming to have seen something he couldn't explain. Travis had been hiking alone and set up camp by the waterfall where Jack had last been. He described hearing footsteps circling his tent during the night, slow, deliberate steps like someone was watching him. But when he emerged, there was no one there. As the hours passed, he began to feel as if the forest itself was closing in on him. He wandered for hours, disoriented, trying to find his way back to the trail. At one point, he heard someone whispering his name, a voice so close it sent a chill down his spine. In the distance, he saw a figure standing at the edge of the trees, but when he called out to it, the figure didn't move. Travis ran, heart pounding, and didn't stop until he stumbled into a ranger station. When questioned about his experience, Travis couldn't explain it fully. He talked about a deep, suffocating sense of dread, like something had been pulling him into the woods, deeper and deeper, until he could no longer find his way back. He spoke of feeling like the trees were alive, watching him, and even when he wasn't moving, the woods felt like they were alive with eyes. The rangers, of course, didn't know what to make of it. No one could find Jack, and no one could explain what Travis had seen or felt. Years later, hikers still speak in hushed tones about the Devil's Hollow, a place where the trail seems to shift and where it's said you might hear your name whispered on the wind. Some say Jack Wilder still roams those woods, lost forever, searching for a way out, or maybe trying to warn others not to wander too far into the hollow. The whispers persist, the shadows remain, and the trail continues to claim those who venture too deep into its heart. No one has ever explained the mysterious disappearances or the strange occurrences that plague the trail. But one thing is certain, the Appalachian Trail holds something more than just wild beauty. It holds darkness, and if you listen closely enough, you might just hear it call your name too.
Story number 4.
The Appalachian Trail has a reputation for both its natural beauty and its eerie, unsettling presence, where the line between reality and fear often blurs. There's a story about a hiker named Rachel Adams, who ventured out onto the trail in 2003, hoping to take a few days for herself. Rachel was an experienced hiker, and the solitude of the woods called to her. But what she didn't know was that the trail, like so many before it, hides its own dark secrets. Rachel started her hike in northern Georgia, well prepared and eager to escape her busy life. Her first few days were uneventful, filled with the usual sounds of birds, squirrels, and the wind in the trees. But as she made her way deeper into the trail, a strange tension began to settle in her bones. The air grew heavier, and the familiar sounds of wildlife seemed to fade. It wasn't an immediate thing, just a subtle shift that made her feel at times like she wasn't truly alone. On the 4th day, Rachel found a secluded camping spot near a large, darkened cave. It was a picturesque area, tucked away from the main trail, but as she set up camp, something about the place unsettled her. The cave seemed to hold a coldness, even though it was a warm summer night. Rachel chalked it up to being overly tired, and she settled down for an early rest. Around midnight, she was jolted awake by the sound of something scraping against the rocks near the cave's entrance. At first, she thought it was an animal, perhaps a raccoon or a bear. But then she heard something else, a soft voice, faint and distant, calling her name. Rachel. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. The voice was gentle, but unmistakable, as if it knew her. Her instincts screamed at her to leave, but curiosity held her in place. She grabbed her flashlight and shone it toward the entrance of the cave, but the beam only revealed empty space. The voice called again, this time clearer and more urgent. "Rachel, come closer." Terrified, Rachel grabbed her things and rushed toward the trail, desperate to leave. But as she turned, she felt a chill crawl up her spine, a presence, something close behind her. She whipped around, shining her flashlight into the darkness, but once again, there was nothing there. No sign of anyone or anything. She continued on her hike, shaken but determined to make it through. However, as she ventured deeper into the wilderness, the strange occurrences escalated. The whispers followed her, faint and distorted, coming from places where there should have been no one. She began hearing footsteps that weren't her own, brushing against the leaves behind her, though when she looked, the trail was always empty. But the most terrifying experience came on the 7th day of her hike, when Rachel made camp near a clearing in the forest. As she set up her tent, she noticed something disturbing, a set of footprints. They were fresh, leading directly up to her campsite. But the footprints weren't normal. They were too large, too deep, and they appeared to be dragging, as though something or someone was crawling toward her. Rachel's heart raced, and her sense of dread deepened. She tried to convince herself it was nothing, perhaps just the remnants of some wild animal. But as she lay in her tent that night, the fear reached its peak. She heard it again, the scratching at the outside of the tent, followed by that voice. Only this time, it wasn't calling her name. It was speaking to her directly. "You're not supposed to be here." The voice was distorted, garbled, as if it was coming from deep underground. She held her breath, heart pounding in her chest. She wanted to flee, but something kept her frozen in place, too afraid to move, too afraid to even breathe. The night dragged on, and as dawn finally broke, Rachel packed up her things and fled the area, leaving the trail behind. She didn't stop until she found a ranger station, where she explained everything, though no one could offer an explanation. No one could understand why she felt so certain that something had been watching her, following her. In the weeks that followed, Rachel struggled to forget the events of her hike, but the memories stayed with her. She began having vivid nightmares about the voice, the footsteps, and the strange dragging footprints. Eventually, she returned to her everyday life, but she never set foot on the Appalachian Trail again. Years later, hikers who passed through the same area near the cave reported hearing strange whispers in the wind, faint voices that seemed to call their names, voices that beckoned as if inviting them deeper into the forest. They, too, reported strange, dragging footprints near the same clearing, and a sense of unease that they couldn't shake, even in the brightest daylight. Some say that the voice Rachel heard still lingers in the woods, waiting for its next victim, calling out to them, drawing them closer, one step at a time. There's one warning shared among those who've hiked the trail for years. If you ever hear your name whispered from the shadows, don't answer, just keep walking.
Story number 5.
The Appalachian Trail has seen its fair share of eerie occurrences and disappearances, but few tales are as unsettling as that of a man named Ethan Cole, who vanished under strange circumstances in the early 2000s. His story has become one of the most chilling legends whispered among hikers and park rangers to this day. Ethan, an avid outdoorsman in his mid-30s, had been hiking the Appalachian Trail for years. He was an experienced solo hiker, accustomed to spending weeks at a time in the wild, far from the comforts of civilization. He had always found solace in the solitude of the woods, and nothing about the wilderness ever seemed to unnerve him. But when he decided to take on a more isolated section of the trail in central Virginia, he would find something that would alter his reality forever. He set out in late spring with nothing more than a small backpack, a tent, and a couple of days' worth of food. The first few days were uneventful, though Ethan began to notice a creeping unease in the air, as if something in the forest wasn't quite right. He heard strange noises at night, branches snapping, footsteps on the forest floor, but whenever he checked, there was no sign of an animal or another hiker. On the 5th day, things took a more sinister turn. Ethan had set up camp near a dense cluster of trees at the edge of a narrow valley. The evening was quiet, the sun setting behind the hills, casting long shadows across the trail. As he started to prepare his dinner, he heard a soft voice, distant, almost like a hum, coming from deep within the trees. He couldn't make out the words, but the voice sounded familiar, like someone he knew. At first, he thought it was just the wind, but then the voice became clearer, louder. It wasn't wind. It wasn't an animal. It was a person's voice. Ethan. The sound sent a chill down his spine. He grabbed his flashlight, scanning the trees. Nothing. No one. But the voice called out again, this time more urgently. Ethan, come closer. Confused and unsettled, Ethan stood frozen, trying to comprehend what he was hearing. Was it someone else on the trail? Had someone gotten lost? But there was no one around for miles. He was completely alone. Still, the voice seemed to draw him in, like a magnetic force pulling him toward the darkness. Against his better judgment, he took a few tentative steps in the direction of the voice. He tried to shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Something felt off in a way he couldn't explain. But the more he moved, the louder the voice became, and the more it seemed to beckon him. Ethan, come to me. He entered the trees, shining his flashlight into the thickening dark, but still saw nothing. The voice continued, now just a few feet away. But as he reached the source of the sound, the voice abruptly stopped. Ethan froze, his heart racing. For a moment, everything was eerily quiet. Then he felt it, something behind him, a presence. He spun around, shining the flashlight into the night, but once again, there was nothing there, no one, just the rustling of the wind and the sound of his own breathing. He felt a deep unease gnawing at him, something primal, something telling him to turn around and leave, but he couldn't. He turned back toward the direction he had come from, but the forest seemed different now. The trees were darker, the air colder, and the trail gone. The path he had been walking on just moments ago had vanished, replaced by a maze of trees and shadows. The more he searched for his bearings, the more he realized he was completely lost. Panic set in. He tried to retrace his steps, but the landscape had changed entirely. It was as if the forest itself was shifting, its boundaries closing in on him. Hours passed, but Ethan couldn't find his way back to camp. Desperation took hold as he called out, but his voice was swallowed by the darkness. He had no choice but to keep walking. By the time the sun began to rise, Ethan had wandered miles off the trail, his body weary, his mind unraveling. He came across an old, dilapidated cabin, barely visible through the trees. At first, he thought it might be an abandoned ranger station or some forgotten shelter, but when he approached, a deep sense of dread filled his chest. The door creaked open with a low groan, and inside, everything was covered in dust and cobwebs. It was empty, except for something that made his blood run cold. In the center of the room was a pile of old, weathered objects, ripped clothing, abandoned gear, broken hiking poles, things that belonged to previous hikers. Some of the items looked decades old. And then, near the back wall, were strange symbols carved deeply into the wood, as if someone had been marking their territory, or perhaps trying to leave a warning. Ethan turned to leave, but before he could make it to the door, he heard the voice again, this time much closer, right behind him. Ethan, the voice was unmistakable now. It wasn't coming from the outside. It wasn't in the wind. It was inside the cabin with him, whispering in his ear. He whipped around, but again, no one was there. The room felt oppressive, as if the walls were closing in on him. He stumbled out of the cabin in a panic, running, not caring where he was going, just needing to get away from the voice. The next morning, a search team found his abandoned gear near the trail. His backpack, his water bottle, even his boots were left behind as if he had disappeared into thin air. Despite an extensive search, no sign of Ethan was ever found. It was as if the trail had swallowed him whole. In the years since, hikers who have passed through that area have reported hearing strange whispers, feeling as if they are being drawn off the trail by an unseen force. Some say they hear their names in the wind, calling them toward the depths of the forest, toward the cabin no one should ever find. The question remains, did Ethan Cole wander too deep into the woods, or was something more sinister lurking, waiting for him? Whatever happened to him that night, his name is still whispered among those who hike the Appalachian Trail, a reminder that sometimes the wilderness is more than just trees and rocks. It can be something darker, something that calls you from the shadows, and once you follow, you may never return.
Story number 6.
The Appalachian Trail is notorious for its beauty and its secrets. It's a place where time feels like it stands still, where hikers often feel a sense of peace and serenity. But for some, the trail reveals something much darker, something that lingers long after they've left the woods. One of the most unsettling stories is that of a young woman named Lily Harper, who disappeared without a trace in 2012. Lily had been hiking the Appalachian Trail alone, a journey she dreamed of taking for years. At 26, she was a seasoned outdoorswoman, accustomed to trekking through difficult terrain. She started her hike in Georgia, planning to follow the trail north for a few weeks. Her friends and family were supportive of her journey, knowing how much it meant to her, but none of them knew that Lily was about to encounter something that would alter her life, if not end it entirely. For the first few days, Lily enjoyed the hike. The solitude of the forest, the beauty of the landscape, and the simplicity of life on the trail brought her a sense of peace. But on the 5th day, something changed. Lily had set up camp near a remote section of the trail, somewhere between North Carolina and Tennessee. It was a quiet spot, tucked away in the trees with a small creek running nearby. She spent the evening listening to the sounds of the forest, trying to relax before continuing her journey the next day. But that night, she heard something strange. At first, it was a faint noise, a low humming sound that seemed to come from deep within the woods. Lily brushed it off, assuming it was the wind or perhaps a distant animal. But as the night wore on, the sound grew louder, more distinct. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't an animal. It was a voice, distant but clear, humming a song she didn't recognize. Curious but unsettled, Lily ventured out of her tent, shining her flashlight toward the trees. At first, she saw nothing, but as she scanned the dark forest, she caught a glimpse of something, a figure barely visible in the shadows, standing still among the trees. Lily froze. The figure wasn't moving. It was simply there, watching. She called out, but the figure didn't respond. Instead, the humming continued, the sound rising and falling like an eerie lullaby. Slowly, Lily made her way toward the figure, drawn to it in a way she couldn't explain. But when she got closer, the figure was gone. There was no sign of anyone. Shaken, Lily returned to her camp, but the feeling of being watched lingered. She spent the rest of the night on edge, unable to sleep. The humming continued, and she could swear that it was closer now. By morning, she was exhausted and unnerved, but she packed up her gear and began walking again, hoping that the unsettling experience was just her mind playing tricks on her. However, as the day went on, things only grew worse. Lily noticed something odd. Footprints. Fresh footprints, just off the trail. They were large, too large for any animal she recognized. They were humanoid in shape, but the toes were unnaturally long, and the prints seemed to drag across the ground as if something had been moving slowly and deliberately. She felt an overwhelming sense of dread, like she wasn't alone. The woods seemed quieter now, the usual sounds of birds and insects gone, replaced by an oppressive silence. Lily couldn't shake the feeling that something was following her. She turned often, scanning the trees, but each time she saw nothing. That night, as she camped once more, she heard the humming again. But this time, it wasn't distant. It was right outside her tent. The voice was clearer now, singing a soft, haunting melody in a language she couldn't understand. It felt wrong, unnatural, and the hairs on the back of her neck stood up. Lily lay frozen in her tent, too scared to move, as the humming continued. It seemed to move around her, circling her camp like some kind of predatory creature. Then the humming stopped. Everything went silent, too silent. Lily's breath caught in her throat, and she strained to hear any sound, but there was nothing, just the oppressive quiet of the forest. Then came the whisper. Lily, her name, clear and cold, whispered directly into her ear. She bolted upright, heart racing, but no one was there. Panicked, Lily grabbed her things and tried to leave, but the trail had changed. The path she had walked hours earlier was gone. The trees had closed in, and the trail had disappeared into a thick, suffocating fog that had appeared out of nowhere. She was lost, and the sense of being followed grew unbearable. The whispers seemed to echo through the fog, calling her name, drawing her deeper into the woods. Lily stumbled through the dense forest for hours, But no matter how far she walked, she couldn't escape the fog. The whispers continued, growing louder, more frantic. She felt as if the forest itself was alive, reaching out to pull her in. By morning, there was no sign of Lily. Her backpack and camp were found abandoned on the trail, her gear scattered about, but she was gone. Search teams scoured the area, but despite their efforts, there was no trace of her. No footprints, no signs of struggle. It was as if Lily had simply vanished, swallowed by the forest. Some hikers who passed through the area afterward claimed to have heard strange sounds, the faint humming like a lullaby coming from the trees. Others reported hearing whispers in the wind, calling their names, urging them to leave before it was too late. To this day, no one knows what happened to Lily Harper. Some say she was taken by something dark and ancient in the woods, something that preys on those who venture too deep into the Appalachian Trail. Others believe that the forest is cursed, that it has a way of claiming those who are drawn too far into its depths. Whatever the truth may be, one thing is certain: the Appalachian Trail is not just a path through the wilderness. It's a place where the line between reality and nightmare can vanish in an instant, and once you hear the whispers calling your name, it might be too late to turn back.
Story number 7.
The Appalachian Trail has long been a place where many have sought solace in nature, but it's also been a place where some have met untimely fates or experienced things that should not be possible. One of the most terrifying stories is that of Ben Thompson, a young hiker who disappeared in 2015 while hiking alone through a remote section of the trail in Pennsylvania. Ben, in his late 20s, was a backpacking enthusiast. He had hiked sections of the Appalachian Trail before, and his friends knew him as someone who could handle the roughest terrain without hesitation. But on this particular trip, Ben decided to go solo, seeking a few days of isolation in the woods. His family and friends didn't think much of it. Ben was prepared, and he was used to venturing off into the wilderness. Everything started off like any other hike. Ben trekked through the dense forests, climbed the steep ridges, and camped under the stars. But on the third night, things took an odd turn. Ben had set up camp near a ridge with a breathtaking view of the valley below. It was an isolated spot, far from any major trailheads, but the serenity of it was what drew him in. As night fell, Ben started a small campfire and cooked a simple meal. He had just finished eating when he heard something that made him freeze in his tracks. It was a rustling sound coming from the brush nearby. At first, he thought it was an animal, perhaps a deer or a raccoon. But as he sat quietly, listening, he realized it wasn't just a rustle. It was the sound of something moving purposefully, slowly, through the undergrowth, as if stalking him. Ben's heart rate picked up. He stood, cautiously grabbing his flashlight, scanning the darkness. His eyes darted over the trees and shrubs, but all he could see were shadows. He felt something watching him, but there was nothing to be found. The rustling continued, but now it seemed to be circling him, moving closer, then retreating. Each time it grew closer, a sense of dread gnawed at him. He sat down by the fire, trying to convince himself it was just the wind or an animal. But the sounds persisted. Hours passed, and the rustling didn't stop. Then, just when Ben thought he might finally be able to sleep, the rustling grew louder and sharper, too deliberate, too close. He stood up, feeling the hairs on his neck rise. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't the wind. Something was out there, and it was drawing nearer. Ben yelled into the darkness, "Who's there?" But his voice was swallowed by the silence. The rustling stopped, and a new sound emerged. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps, as if someone were walking in the leaves right outside his camp. He shined his flashlight in the direction of the footsteps, but once again, nothing. There was no sign of anyone. No footprints. No movement. Just the eerie stillness of the night. Terrified, Ben decided to pack up and leave. He gathered his things quickly, trying to stay calm as he threw his gear into his backpack. His flashlight flickered as he tried to get his bearings, the beam dancing wildly across the trees. But as he started to leave the campsite, the footsteps followed him. They were right behind him now, almost too close. He could hear the soft crunch of leaves, the distinct sound of someone walking just behind him. Ben's pace quickened. He was nearly running now, trying to make his way down the trail and out of the woods. The footsteps, however, kept pace with him. No matter how fast he walked, they stayed just a few feet behind. Every now and then, Ben would turn around, shining the light into the darkness, but each time he turned, there was nothing there. The footsteps would stop for a moment, but then pick up again, right behind him. By dawn, Ben had made no progress. His anxiety was through the roof. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking just beyond the reach of his flashlight, something that was following him. His senses were on high alert as he stumbled through the woods, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't escape the sound of those footsteps. When the sun finally rose, Ben was exhausted, disoriented, and terrified. He tried to reach out to his friends, but there was no cell service in the area. In a panic, he began to head toward the nearest ranger station, but as he walked, he felt like he was getting no closer. He wasn't on the trail anymore. The woods seemed to stretch endlessly, and the familiar landmarks had disappeared. And then, in the middle of the day, it happened. Ben looked around, confused, as the path in front of him seemed to close in. The trees were denser now, and the trail had become narrower and more overgrown. He tried to retrace his steps, but everything looked the same. The woods felt different, darker. He realized that he was lost. No one ever saw Ben again. His backpack was discovered 2 days later, just off the trail. It was abandoned, lying at the base of a tree with his gear scattered around it. But there was no sign of Ben, no footprints leading away, no trace of him at all. A search party was dispatched, but despite a thorough search, they found nothing. For years after, hikers reported hearing strange sounds in that area, the unmistakable crunching of footsteps just behind them, or the rustling of leaves from a place where no one stood. Many claimed to feel a heavy presence, something that seemed to be stalking them through the trees. The forest had claimed Ben, and whatever was out there seemed to want to claim others too. Some say the forest is haunted by a lost spirit, a hiker who was followed by something that wasn't quite human, something that still roams the woods, waiting for its next victim. Others believe that the trail holds darker forces, ancient and malevolent, that prey on those who wander too deep into the wilderness. Ben's story is only one of many, but it serves as a chilling reminder of what can happen when you step too far into the unknown, where the woods are alive with whispers, shadows, and the feeling that you are never truly alone. And if you're ever on that stretch of trail, alone with only the sound of your footsteps, remember, you might not be the only one walking in the dark.
Story number 8.
The Appalachian Trail, with its vast stretches of wilderness and isolation, is no stranger to unnerving tales of the unknown. One of the most chilling stories involves a man named David Turner, who disappeared in 2008, never to be seen again. His tale remains one of the most mysterious and frightening among the local rangers and seasoned hikers alike. David, a 34-year-old from Asheville, North Carolina, was an experienced hiker. He had done multiple solo treks across various parts of the Appalachian Trail and had always returned home without incident. But in 2008, he set out for a week-long solo hike in the southern part of the trail. His friends and family knew he was well prepared for the journey, but none could have predicted that it would be his last. David's hike began without any unusual events. He passed through the usual dense forest, climbing the hills and traversing the ridges that the Appalachian Trail is famous for. But as the days went by, his communications with his friends became more sporadic. The last message he sent was on the 4th day of his journey, a simple text saying, "Camped at a remote spot near Mount Rogers, hearing strange noises. I'm fine, just a little unnerved. We'll check in tomorrow." The next day, no message came. His friends assumed it was just an area with poor service, but when he didn't show up at the designated trailhead by the end of the week, they began to worry. After 2 days of waiting, they called for help. Rangers immediately began a search for David, and the trail was combed from top to bottom. On the 6th day of the search, a hiker stumbled upon something that made their blood run cold. It was David's backpack, sitting alone on a large rock beside the trail. His tent, food, and gear were all neatly packed away, but David was nowhere in sight. The search intensified, and the area around Mount Rogers was thoroughly scoured. Rangers and volunteers hiked for miles, but they found nothing. No signs of struggle, no footprints, no trace of David. It wasn't until a few days later that they found something far more disturbing. In a remote, little-used section of the trail, deep in a ravine, they discovered a torn piece of David's jacket caught on a branch. The fabric was shredded, as if it had been ripped violently, and the surrounding foliage appeared disturbed, trampled, as if something large and heavy had passed through. But there were no animal tracks, and the marks didn't resemble anything they had ever seen before. Still, they found nothing else. Then a week later, one of the search party members, a veteran ranger, came across a strange, haunting discovery. Deep in the woods, near a stream and away from any marked trails, he found something that sent chills down his spine. It was a crude figure carved into the bark of a tree, resembling a man, but distorted in ways that didn't quite make sense. The figure was not just a carving, it was something more, scratched and scraped into the tree's surface, as if someone had tried to carve out a human shape from the wood, only to be interrupted. As he stood there examining it, the ranger noticed something else, something more unsettling. The figure's head appeared to have been altered recently. It was as though someone had added another layer to the carving, scratching a deep, hollow depression into the center of the face, almost like it had been carved in desperation. At that moment, the ranger realized something. The figure looked like it was staring right at him. He stepped back, feeling his pulse quicken, and that's when he heard it. Footsteps. Not distant or faint. They were close, uncomfortably close. He turned quickly, but there was no one there. The ranger didn't stick around long. He left the area, quickly notifying the others about the eerie discovery. Afterward, the search was called off. No trace of David Turner was ever found. Several months later, a new hiker, completely unaware of the disappearance, camped near that same ravine. The next morning, he told his friends about strange noises he had heard in the night, whispers and footsteps just outside his tent, though no one was there. When he ventured out, he discovered a carving on a tree near his campsite, an unsettling figure of a man, eerily similar to the one the ranger had found months earlier. Rumors began to circulate among hikers. Some claimed to have heard whispers in the woods at night, faint, distant, like voices calling your name from just beyond the trees. Others swore that the woods had a way of twisting the mind, making you feel like something was always watching you. The forest seemed to swallow up lost hikers, drawing them into the thickest parts of the woods, never to be seen again. To this day, the mystery of David Turner's disappearance remains unsolved, and the area around Mount Rogers is often spoken of in hushed tones. Some believe that the forest has a life of its own, an ancient presence that watches over the hikers who pass through, sometimes taking them into its depths, never to return. There are whispers of a figure that roams the woods. Perhaps it was David, or perhaps it was something that took him. Whatever the truth is, the trail remains a place where some hikers feel an inexplicable sense of unease, as if they're being followed, as if something is waiting for them to venture deep. And if you happen to find yourself near Mount Rogers in the late evening, you might want to listen closely. You might hear something behind you, a whisper, a footstep, or even the scratching of something or someone carving into the trees. Some things, it seems, are best left unexplored.